No, I'm going to speak about maybe the most boring thing for some, but from my personal perspective, one of the most important things there are, because in the end, regulation is defining and can define in an instant whether your business is valuable or whether you are out of business. And on the same in the same time, it actually allows us, being a company with less than 2 years at the moment, to compete with very, very established players. And to give you one idea, for example, private banks who are there for more than 200 years are transferring their complete assets to our platform so that we allow them to digitalize their business. And obviously, if you want to do something like this, you need the required trust. So what is it all about? When you ask people to think about regulation, very often it's for them about bureaucracy, but in the end, regulation is defining all the rules for more or less all industries. So if you're in transport, if you're in health, if you're in finance, and if you want to be successful in this industry, you have to be compliant. So it's much more than bureaucracy, and I would offer a different framing. Let's think about regulation as a key driver for trust. Why is that? Because in the end, if you have clear rules, you create a level playing field, allowing new startups like our own startup to compete with very, very established players. And on the same time, you also make sure that everybody in the market can trust each other. And that's actually the history of regulation and where it's coming from. It's really focusing on functioning markets. And this is getting more and more important if you look at today's world. Because, as you all know, we are talking about ecosystems. And ecosystems are built on partnerships. So what does it actually mean? If I'm working, for example, like one of the speakers speaking before me was a cloud provider, you know that they're an ID provider, there are very specialized services out there, and you want to connect with each of them in order to build a scalable business based on your own core competency. If you want to do something like this, you need to be sure that your partners are trustworthy partners. You need to be sure that you have standardized APIs or standardized ways to connect to them. You need to be sure that you have a legal framework which actually allows you to establish stable business relationships. So if you really want to build something scalable, something large in today's world of ecosystems, you need to have trusted partnerships. And in the end, this is, from my perspective, the core idea of regulation. If you compare that to the Wild West, it's actually the opposite. So just as a cross-check, thinking back to the Wild West, just imagine going to a bank, as I'm in the finance industry, so one example from the banking industry. Just imagine you bringing your money to the bank, and after 2 days, the banker decides, okay, due to whatever, logistic costs or any other made-up reason, he now introduces a payout fee of 20%, and 20% of your money is gone. The only way to get your money back is actually a duel at noon, and then the question is, who is faster? That's basically where you end up when you have no regulation. So it's all about who is the strongest, and that is obviously the worst thing that can happen for startups like us and a lot of you here in the room. So if you want to build something big, and if you want to enter a new market, actually regulation is one of the best things which can happen to you. And that might be surprising if you look at a fintech, like my industry, but in the end, that's the core reason why a lot of my colleagues at different fintechs are such big fans of regulation, because we all see that a level playing field actually allows us to compete with very, very established players and not be outcompeted just because of historic results, but really being able to prove that we are in this business and are able to offer our service in a better way than the established players. So good regulation leads to a competitive advantage. When you look at Germany, when you look at Europe, and I have to admit, when I think about business, I always think about Europe first. That's a huge, huge opportunity for us. Whereas in a lot of industries in the digital world, so being it social networks, be it cloud businesses, when you look at the current market situation, in a lot of industries, we lost the race until now, and the US or Asia were outperforming us. But when it comes to heavily regulated industries like health, like transportation, like finance, we are still in a very good position. And why is that? Because Europe is one of the largest markets. You can argue that it's the largest market in the world for most industries. It has a very, very strong brand when it comes to quality and trust. And we have the opportunity to create rules which are, let's say, piloted by several countries. And if they work for such a complex surrounding than Europe, you can also scale them across the world. I'm one of the critics of GDPR when it comes to a certain part of the GDPR. But I have to admit, one thing I really like about it, it's a proof that Europe can design rules which are then have to be respected all over the world. And actually, it's a very good example to show that Europe can create rules that allow us to outcompete the rest because we work with them first, we are compliant to the regulation, and if we are compliant, we can actually be in a very, very good competitive situation compared to everybody else. So what are key priorities when you think about that? First, we really have to focus on a level playing field. So if you accept that regulation can be something good, the key thing we all have to fight for is a level playing field. What do I mean by that? There's some regulation, if you look at details, which seems to be more designed to protect established players and incumbents, and is actually an entry barrier for new players. That is obviously not the desired outcome. What you want to have is a level playing field where the regulation focuses on something like customer protection, on something like transparency, on something like financial stability, on something like clear rules between partners how to interact. But if you fulfill all these criteria where you can truly outcompete however old you are. As I said, Elinvar, for example, 2 years old and currently outcompeting partners who are in this market for 50 years and working together with partners who are in this market for more than 200 years. So this is exactly what we all should fight for, a level playing field. Second thing, which is very, very important, is obviously tech-neutral regulation. So for example, if you look at German law, very often you see things like you have to sign something in person on paper. That's obviously not a very scalable and not a very good regulation. What you need is something like, yes, you want to have an identified person and you want to have something which is like not changeable in the future, so durable in some way, but whether this is done by signing in person on paper or whether this is done by an electronic signature done via whatever device and authenticated by multiple factors, this is something which can be decided by the respective provider. And the third thing is we really need to focus on single markets which are as big as possible. So that's why personally I do quite a lot on focusing on the single European market and obviously also on then trying to scale out of Europe across the world. And this is something we all should be engaged on as well. If we do that right, this is obviously enabling new business models. So to give you some insight about why I'm so interested in regulation, Elinvar in its core is a fully regulated financial services provider, but providing software as a service to asset and wealth managers to digitalize their business. So on the one hand, we are completely focused on tech. 70% of our team is tech. And on the other hand, we are fully regulated, thereby allowing us to, for example, having private banks like Donner and Reuschel, which is more than 200 years old, to transfer their complete asset and wealth management business to our platform, and then we are executing this business for them. If you're in this field, obviously you are very, very interested in good regulation, and that's how I got in touch with that. And this business model is a very good example for the ecosystem I just described. So we are working together with a cloud provider. We are working together with several third parties like ID providers, market data providers, research providers. We are then working together with our partners being a customer of ours. We have their C clients involved. And in total, there's a huge ecosystem. And if you look at this in total, you need a very, very well-designed regulation to make it happen. But if you have that, there's obviously huge potential for growth for everybody because you have a network of highly specialized partners who each in their respective field are much, much better than the providers who were there before that, like the traditional setup of banks where one player is providing everything. And for that reason, I'm a strong believer that regulation is the driving force for trust and scale if executed right. And think, yes, Regulation might seem boring at one point or the other if you look at it only from the perspective of bureaucracy. But if you do it right, and if you focus on regulation as a driver of trust and of stability, and a driver for a level playing field, then actually regulation is one of the biggest enabler for business and growth, which I can think of. And I hope that gave you some insight of why I think there's so much opportunity in it. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm a bit fast in time, so happy to provide some more insights on that. So just to give you one idea, which is very concrete and might involve a lot of you, because yesterday evening we spoke about what are like regulatory topics. One of the key topics at the moment is the regulation of cloud services. And if you think about it, we all are used to cloud services, just use them like AWS, Microsoft, IBM, whatever, in order to scale our businesses. The challenge is, if you work in this network, a lot of partners have, let's say, are not very open to use cloud services, and thereby making competition much harder for you, because you actually have a market entry, because if you first have to build a data center in order to compete, that makes life much harder if you're in the health business or in the financial industry. Using cloud services, so therefore, is a huge enabler for all of us building successful startups. That's why we are currently involved and working on a good and working cloud regulation, making sure that infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, whatever business model you can think of, has the right regulatory framework so that you can really compete on a level playing field with huge already established organizations, and build your startup based on this level playing field and really outperform by your core competency, outperform by your team, and outperform the established players by your speed of development. So maybe based on this, as an inspiration, let's all go and fight together for good regulation. It's worth the effort, because it allows us to scale our businesses.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Yes, stay here. We still have time for a few questions since you've been so fast. Are there questions from the audience? Just raise your hand. We'll bring a mic to you. If not, I might start. First, we start with Elinvar. So Elinvar has a BaFin license, which is quite a grueling process to achieve one, because it's a lot of paperwork, I suppose. It takes countless amount of time to get there. Why did you do it, although you're actually more a software company?
So if you really go into the regulation at this point, it actually is completely consistent to what I described. So it makes the life for our partner much easier, because they know when they work together with us, we have the financial stability, we have the operational capacities, we have the expertise, because all of these are requirements in order to get the license. So the license actually allowed us to prove that we are on peer level with a lot of very established players, even though we were only 1 year old. So in fact, we got the license after 9 months. And we went live with the first established private bank, Warburg, after just being 1 year there as a company.
So it's also a tool to build trust.
Yeah.
You're also a chairman of the working group FinTechs and digital banking at Bitcoin. So that seems like quite
Bitcom.
Something to... Huh? Sorry,
Bitcom.
Bitcom to you? Yes, Bitcom. Quite something to do on the like running a startup at the same time. How do you manage both, and why do you still invest so much time in this project?
In the end, I think as regulation has such a huge impact on business, it's in the interest of all of us that we are engaged in actively shaping the regulation. So until recently, a lot of startups just cope with whatever there was. And that's obviously a huge disadvantage, because if you look at details, a lot of established players are very engaged in shaping the regulation in order to defend their businesses. So it's on us to make sure that we have a regulation which really focuses on things like level playing field, strengthening the European single market, strengthening tech neutrality. And I'd say this is something worth working for, because it enables our growth and has a direct business impact, which we can prove on several occasions when it comes to our specific business.
What's your experience so far? Like, that means obviously you're doing lobbying, so to say, for the fintech scene. Are you being heard? Do you have partners to speak to at the regulations? Are they eager to listen? Or?
Yeah, so absolutely. I'd say when it comes to the open exchange of ideas, you see a huge development within the last 5 to 7 years. because now everybody on the political scene has a complete understanding that digitalization is the key driver for the benefits or the of Germany and Europe and the competitiveness of this country. So they are very interested and very keen to shape a surrounding which allows startups to grow, and they want to make sure that we build strong businesses here, be it from an established player or from a new business. And for that reason, they are very open to hear what new businesses are saying and what are actually the obstacles we have to cope with. And I have to say, during the last years, this is also institutionalized. So for example, I'm advisor to the Ministry of Finance. This is, in the end, the body who is writing the regulation for the financial markets. So obviously, it's very helpful that we are involved in this. And it's not just like lobbying for one country, but for one company, but it's rather really the industry reflected there. So some startups, some established players, the regulators, some advisory companies. So in total, really making sure that the industry is reflected there.
Cool. Just a quick look into the audience. Are there questions by now? If not, I have a last question, and then we go on to the next topic. So how much is the difference between dealing with regulators in Germany and in the EU? Like, where does Germany still have its own say, and where is it more the EU law?
So for the financial industry, most of the laws today are done on the European level, but there's always a local implementation. So one thing is, in order to strengthen the European market, you want to make sure that there's not too much individual changes on the implementation level, but rather really everybody focusing on the one European law. On the other hand, we have the advantage that Germany is obviously very involved in shaping whatever happens on the European level. So I'd say there's not much going on against the German vote. So for that reason, we can really make use of the German vote there. And I think we are on quite a good track there.
Cool. All right. Thanks a lot, Chris Bartz of Elinvar.